sure. Welcome to the Executive Talk. You spent probably half of your professional life in diplomacy. The other half, you're an entrepreneur, you're a consultant. Which of those lives is more stressful?
I like both very much, but I think my diplomatic life was more stressful, in particular as ambassador at large, head of the task force Switzerland Second World War.
That was a huge thing, of course, yeah.
Huge thing, 96 till 99. I was most of the time in an airplane between the United States, Switzerland, Israel. I had hearings in front of US Congress. I had hearings in the Knesset. I was really in the limelight. It was the biggest crisis Switzerland had since the Second World War. And I turned gray within 3 years.
That was, of course, an exceptional situation, if you look at it also in hindsight. Afterwards, you were ambassador in Berlin, so a big job as well. Would you say back then as well, that was a more stressful job? Because you're always always working, you're always on the job, you always have to react and be as lively as possible?
I think now I have the same situation. I manage a lot of crises. I have a lot of issue management, and I like challenges. I think I perform much better under stress. So it's not a big difference between being ambassador at a very important posting like Germany or being now an entrepreneur managing different difficult situations for bigger, smaller companies, for high net worth individuals. I wouldn't call it stress. I just think I have a busy life, but I like to have a busy life.
Of course, I asked that question for a reason, because you alluded to it yourself. You're used to stress, and I read you wrote a book about your time as an ambassador, as a diplomat, and you wrote something interesting in there, that you are very cold-blooded in a way that's something that nature has given you on the way, that you react quite well under stress, you say. Where does that come from? Do you know? I mean, is it something you learned, or was it really from early on you had that?
I think it is one of my skills. You know, you have good skills, bad skills, and that's one of my skills. Also at university, when I had tests, or in the army, or when I had to testify in front of US Congress, the more stress, the more pressure around me, on me, the calmer I get. I remember when I testified in Congress, the whole Federal Council, all my consultants, everybody was totally nervous. And I think I made them even more nervous because I was very calm. But I think that's one of my skills. I don't get nervous. I get nervous when I see Roger Federer playing at Wimbledon, when I see the Swiss football national team on TV. But when I get involved myself, I'm very calm.
Is it even that you, I don't know, that you feed from that you nourish from that you almost need those situations to feel alive, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I think I love these situations. It makes me perform better. I need that pressure, and I think that's one of my skills, which I can use also working for companies and others, because they have a crisis situation, and often in a crisis situation everybody is extremely nervous, and I think if you're nervous, you do not perform very well. You lose part of your capacity to deal with the problem.
Having said that you talk about your new job, or your almost like your second professional career. Do you ever miss your first one? Do you ever miss being a diplomat, being an ambassador?
No, I think I had two great lives. I had the big advantage of having had two of the most prestigious postings a Swiss diplomat can really have. I was then at the age of 45, and then I had the challenge if I go on being a diplomat, or if I follow another passion I have, being an entrepreneur. And I'm very grateful that I took the right decision about almost 20 years ago, changed to the private sector, and followed my second passion.
It's almost like you've I mean, as you said it before as well, you achieved all this at such a young age. I think you're still the youngest ambassador in Berlin, probably. You were back then, of course. And then at 45, it's almost like a kind of a rupture, and you have to think of something else, something that other ambassadors or diplomats, they work until 65, and then they're retired in their job. Did that ever worry you as well, that you achieved so much in early years that you had to think about a second career or the life after the diplomatic corps?
I was very lucky to become ambassador, I think, at the age of 37, really youngest Swiss ambassador ever. And I didn't have time to think about what's next. I took the challenges which were offered to me, grateful that they were offered to me. A lot of senior ambassadors refused to take the posting, so they
because it was so critical, or
yeah, it was. You know, you could ruin your whole career. In particular, head of the Task Force Switzerland Second World War, one wrong word, and you would ruin your career. There were a lot of business people, and there was even a federal council, a Swiss minister, who had to step basically down. And I like that, and I never worried about what is next. But when I finished my posting in Germany at the age of 45, I was really considering, do I go on like that for another 20 years, 30 years, or do I try something new? And I think one needs new challenges from time to time, otherwise life gets boring.
How much of it was also your position back there? I mean, you were in the limelight back there, and there was a lot of things written about you, and people were looking at probably every step and every word, as you said, that you did. How much was it the kind of almost a feeling, I don't need this anymore, or I don't want this anymore, I want to be more of a kind of a private Thomas Bohr and not the public one?
That's the nice part of it, that I'm not anymore so much in the limelight, but that was not crucial to it. As head of the task force, I had to deal with the media, the worldwide media, CNN in particular, and defend the Swiss interest. And I do that still through the media, with the help of the media, but I'm much less in the limelight. It's more the clients who are in the limelight now. But that was not the crucial part.
Something that was always very clear about you, and when you were in front of the Senate and in those hearings and in front of the media as well, you came across as very confident, as very self-assured, as very sure of yourself. Is that something that is actually in you, or did you have to play that role as well? Are you as self-confident as you seem, as you know, very much again cold-blooded, cool, also in front of the camera?
As a diplomat, but also now as a consultant, I identify the interest of my country or my clients. I prepare a strategy, and then I defend that strategy. And if I do all that in a correct way, I can be very self-confident about it. Because I'm sure I do the right thing. And I think that comes across. It's very difficult if you defend a bad case as a diplomat or as a consultant. If you defend a bad case, you are not as confident. Yes, I had to do that, but I try to avoid that. I always try to fight for the good cause. I try not only to be a good consultant, I try also to be a good father and to show my children that I fight for the right thing. On the other hand, I think I'm confident in what I'm doing. I have a good education. I really try to choose also the cases which I defend, and therefore I have a good conscience, and that helps. Of
course, there's always a risk with cases, and if you're consulting someone, I guess you have been offered a lot of money for cases that you might have thought, oh, they are a bit tricky. And there is, again, you know, always the public is quick to judge and is quick to tell you, why did you take on that case? Why did you take on that mandate? So have they been a lot where you said, no, that's out of question for me? Of course, you can't talk about it, I guess, but where you said a clear no, I couldn't live with that mandate, for example.
Principles are very important, and I think I grew up on a farm. And there I learned that hard work is important, that honesty is important, loyalty is important. And I'm now in a privileged situation where I can really turn down mandates, or I can also give back mandates and tell people I don't want to work for you anymore. And I have done that in the past a couple of times, and I will do so in the future. I like the challenge, and therefore I get always the difficult mandates. The cheap, easy ones, they go to my competitors, to my friendly competitors. I like challenges, but you always have to be able in the evening to look in the mirror and ask yourself, do I do the right thing? And I think that was also, I learned that when I took up the position as ambassador at large, Switzerland, Second World War. I asked myself, can I defend Switzerland and the history of Switzerland during the Second World War? And I could challenge myself, I could say yes, and I still do that with every mandate I take on.
Some of those mandates are tricky ones, and you have been criticized for some of them, mainly from countries of Eastern Europe, in the Russian sphere as well. And those criticisms were quite harsh sometimes. How do you deal with criticism? That's something that you have to live for years already. How do you deal with it personally? Does it hurt?
I think criticism is something positive if it's done in a fair
says.
way.
Yeah.
But I must admit there is a lot of unfair criticism. I think a lot of media are really trying to look for the scandal, are very fast with judgments. And I understand for economic reasons media have to work like that, but I don't have a problem with being criticized. I just like a fair trial, and the media doesn't have that fair trial all the time.
So you feel you have been judged or misjudged?
But you know, but I know how to defend myself, and I defend myself pretty well. But there are people who can't defend themselves very well. But if I look back at my mandates, you know, I still believe it was the right thing to do it at that time. For example, about 15 years ago, I always helped Russian businessmen to defend the interest here in the West. And I still think Western Europe needs Russia, and Russia needs Western Europe. And I'm flabbergasted by the bad political and economic relationship between these two parts of Europe. And I think we should work on that. So I don't have a problem being criticized. I just wished sometimes one would take a little bit a long-term view and not being too short in judging situations.
How much of it is a reputation thing? Because I mean, you work a lot in public affairs, but you hardly ever read that Thomas Bohr is doing public affairs. You always read Thomas Bohr is a lobbyist, and the word lobbyist per se is already a bit negatively connoted, I would say. Would you agree that in Switzerland that line of work does have maybe an image problem or a kind of a reputation smell to it that is hard to kind of defend?
I'm much more a strategic consultant. You know, we consult companies about world affairs, about global affairs, how they should deal with issues which happening or may happening. But I don't feel offended if somebody calls me a lobbyist, because I also lobby in favor of the interest of companies vis-a-vis governments. And I think the democracy needs lobbyists, because in particular members of parliament need support, consulting support, how they deal with issues, because life, economic life, political life is so complicated that they cannot cope without outside consulting. But I think it's very important to be transparent. Whose interest you defend for how much money. And I myself advocate that for many, many years. Unfortunately, in Switzerland, we don't have that system. You can be a lobbyist and don't have to declare for whom you work. And that's something which we should change in our country, in the United States, in Brussels, in the European Union. You have to declare precisely for whom you work.
So do we know all your clients, for example?
You know most of my clients. If you look at my webpage, if you look at my consultants who are member of a public affairs organization, they declare the mandates.
something that goes with that question, of course, is the role of Switzerland in that whole thing. And you talked and wrote about it a lot, that you think, there's a kind of an approach in Switzerland to these questions that is a bit different to other countries. For example, that we have a tendency to always make ourselves smaller. And there's a very nice foreword in your book from, I think it's from Karl Spitteler, who said the Swiss, if they had built the mountains themselves, they would have turned out smaller than they are because they're so modest, the Swiss. Do you think we lack in kind of, in that a lot, in other questions as well, that we make ourselves so small and we're very self-critical, and we kind of look at people who don't behave the same way, and we're a bit more almost suspicious of them?
Absolutely. If you look at the real facts, Switzerland is about the 20th biggest country in the world. If you look, for example, at our economic strengths, at our financial strengths, at the strengths of our innovation, of our education, wherever you have a competitive report, Switzerland is always about the top countries. So if you look at this in absolute numbers, not in per capita numbers, we are around 20th country in the world. We should be member of the G20. We are not. Because when we grow up, everybody tells us we are a small country. This may have been true 100, 200 years ago, but not now. And we have to change that. I think Switzerland is an amazing country, politically, economically, culturally. We can give a lot to the world, and we should show much more courage in exporting, in a nice way, exporting our principles, because a lot of other countries can profit from that, from direct democracy, from our system of federalism, from our system how to integrate foreigners. I think no country in the world does it as good as Switzerland, maybe Luxembourg, but we are really good in that challenge and make the best out of this immigration. How we deal with innovation, how we deal with education. And by doing that, we would also better strengthen the interest of Switzerland, because it's much easier to defend your interest if you have a goodwill reservoir on the other side. And we don't do that.
Having said that, do you think we sell ourselves not good enough, or the other way around? Would they need you to sell themselves better?
I have done that in my last career. I'm not going
so you don't do it
go back to it. But I think really, of course, we have a strategy. We do that, presents Switzerland, it's called. But we do it on a very low level. We do it really not with enough resources. And we do it, as you said, very modest and very shy. We do it also with wrong instruments. Of course, we are proud of our watches. Of course, we are proud of our cheese and the beautiful country. But these are not the biggest assets of Switzerland and not the most important assets. I think if we get involved in the debate the European Union has now to undergo to get an internal reform and to make Europe stronger, Switzerland is really the best example. We are the most European country. There is no country like Switzerland where we have about 10, 12 European cultures and who are performing well economically, who are living in full peace. That is something we should tell Brussels and others in a much more aggressive way.
Since you are talking about Europe, there's a big issue at the moment between Europe and Switzerland. We're talking, of course, about the framework agreement that we still haven't decided which way it should go. If we take what you said before, in that example, for example, do you think we should be more courageous as well? We should be more daring? We should tell Europe more what we want? Do you think we sell ourselves a little bit wrongly there as well?
I always advise my clients to build up a goodwill reservoir, because if you have a goodwill reservoir, it's much easier to defend your interest in negotiations, in crisis. And that's what I suggest the Swiss government should do on a permanent level. Coming to the framework agreement, I think Secretary of State Balzaretti, Minister of Foreign Affairs Cassis did an excellent job. I think that's a great treaty they have negotiated. And I can't understand why the Swiss political system does not accept it. And I'm sure the people will. But in general, I'm a believer in that building up a goodwill reservoir, explaining how valuable Switzerland is for whole of Europe, not only for the European Union, what we contribute in a positive way, etc. I think that the other governments have always to be reminded, because otherwise they always accuse us of cherry picking, which we don't do.
Are you sure? Because that's what, I mean, that's a general perception in Europe and sometimes all over the world as well, that we have a tendency of wanting too much on both sides as well, and you wouldn't call us cherry pickers.
Every good negotiator tries to get the best out. And I negotiate a lot of treaties. I was part of the teams who negotiated also with the European Union. Of course, we were the best diplomats. But you know, the other side was not always so dumb that we could always win in these negotiations and pick the cherries. Believe me, on the other side sit as good negotiators as we are. And we always could find a win-win situation. The European Union doesn't enter into treaties with Switzerland because of our blue eyes. They have their interest, and we satisfy this interest. It's a do ut des, a give and take. And therefore, I totally refute that accusation that we are cherry pickers.
On the other side, aren't we risky enough, maybe in that American way that, as you say, I mean, if you look at President Trump, for example, that's basically what he does. He just takes risks. He tries the most possible. If it doesn't work out, he changes his approach. Is that something that we Swiss could learn from the Americans, for example? You've been living in the States, so you know them very well. Is that something that we're lacking?
As I said, you know, we're lacking a little bit of self-confidence of the Americans, but I think, you know, we are in a different geopolitical position. The United States is still the superpower. They can have another tone. I always think it's very important for a Swiss diplomat, for a Swiss entrepreneur, to be modest, but very sure of what we can deliver. Over-promise is never a good idea, and over-negotiating your position is not a good idea. You should know your limits, and I think that's something Switzerland is doing pretty good if it comes to the European Union. I feel we should be much bolder if it comes to bilateral free trade agreements with countries like now Latin America or the United States. There we missed opportunities in the past because of our agriculture dossier. And there we cannot, because of 1% of our GOP, the agriculture sector, not defend the interest of our industry and our service industry, which are much more important.
It seems to me that you would like to consult the Swiss a little bit more. Final question: do you think that will be more the case in the future?
You know, in the back, I always consult a little bit with Swiss politicians. I also speak a lot to Swiss diplomats. I think we have a very good, efficient diplomatic corps. And I'm, of course, involved in politics because a lot of my clients want to understand how the United States work, how that trade war with China is coming out, how Latin America is working. That's still part of my job, to be able to forecast what's going to happen, and therefore I will all my life stay involved in politics and never retire.
Thomas Bohr, thank you very much.
Thank you.